Hi, my name's Anthony de Jong. I'm actually Tanya's brother. But I'm asking this question. I actually work at Telstra, and we're obviously very interested in a super connected world and the new religion of connecting to a device and having your God near you at all times. Particularly, though, my question is of what relevance is a corporate structure in the super connected world and some of our other institutions? We've already talked about the educational institutions and the risk that they pose, but what about some of our other institutions and our corporate structures?
Well, I think we've seen that some of the most creative organizations are using a much flatter structure that allows information and ideas to be developed collaboratively, where anybody can contribute and where there's an ability of the group to evaluate ideas quickly and not with a strict hierarchy of many different levels, moving away from kind of a military command structure. Certainly companies like Google and Facebook and many of the creative new companies are organized that way. And we're starting problem-solving groups that are not formal companies or government or university organizations that are set up for the purpose of solving a problem worldwide, collaborations to solve a math problem, which is just set up in a few days and solves a problem in an unprecedented amount of time and may go on to something else or not. But this super connected world allows new ways of making decisions that are collaborative, but not the forced collectivism of communism. It's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum.
Can I just add to that? Because I agree with Ray, but I'd like to take it a step further. Most corporations that you would work in are not fit for purpose. The environment has changed to such an extent that they're cumbersome. And organic networks work better, but you always have to look back at whether a system's viable, whether a corporation is viable, a company is viable and fit for purpose. Most aren't. And there's a resistance still to be overcome to shift to organizational structures that are much more fluid, much more adaptive, and much more resilient, which is needed. And we've made things a lot more complicated than they need to be. Ultimately, I think we need to pare back the rationale of how you organize a company to if it's a viable system or not. Those people who are familiar with cybernetics or the work of Stafford Beer will understand what I mean.
Tom Kovac, 2012 AI, European Capital of Culture. Ray, 3 weeks ago in Singularity Summit in New York, which we met, there was a lot of interesting discussions about the future of technology, about the future of intelligence. But the questions that really touched most of all was the question of how institutions, the existing global conditions of how we inhabit these institutions are changing in comparison to the intelligence that software is enabling us to participate in. For example, if we think about Stephen Badylak's discussion about regenerative medicine, his main concern was that we do have the tools and the technologies for change, but the institutions that underwrite these testings and laboratory experimentations are not enabling these technologies to take place. And it takes a long, long time before we get acceptance of these technologies. Now, I would bet the same thing happens in education. If you think about the fact what Sir Ken Robinson discusses, the idea of disorders, for example, children who are totally bored at school because we're teaching them subjects they're not interested in, and we're actually creating careers for people that in 15 years will be totally out of date. How does the institutional shift relate back to the exponential grade that these technologies are enabling us to do? So the real question for this would be, and it comes back to what Jan Tallinn from Skype was saying to me, which was the reason we started Skype.
Can you wrap up your question, please? Keep it tight.
The reason we, sorry about that, I'll be very quick. The reason we started Skype was because we wanted to speak to our friends for free. So these disruptive shifts happen when people have to really make decisions about necessity. So how will these institutions, for example, shift? For example, telcos, health and education.
Thanks.
Okay, well, institutions aren't in charge. I mean, think of the internet itself. We're talking about the super connected world. The emblem of that is the internet. What institution decided there would be an internet? It was started by Advanced Research Projects Agency in the Department of Defense, but it took on a life of its own, and no government or company is in charge of it. And what company decided we should have search engines or Skype? These disruptive innovations come and they're adopted, and there are obstacles, and sometimes there are regulatory agencies like the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, which slow things down, but they end up being like rocks in the river. The progress flows around them. Take embryonic stem cell prohibitions. The progress just flowed around it. So scientists invented a means of creating the equivalent of an embryonic stem cell without embryos. They're called induced pluripotent cells. You take your skin cells, add 4 genes, and it's equivalent of an embryonic stem cell, but there's no embryo, and the ethicists who are opposed to embryonic stem cells support this. So we find that obstacles of regulatory agencies or other institutions that seek to block change end up being like stones in the river. The progress flows around them.
Daniel? Jan? Quick take?
Oh, just to pursue
Yep.
what Ray was just saying. That's true, except you use the word progress for what flows around them. And progress and also not progress flows around them. It is very hard to stop the progression of this technological charge, this expansion. But how much of it is progress and how much of it isn't is the question that I think it's very important that we not all adopt your very optimistic mindset, because it's the very optimistic people who tend to shrug about and not worry about the side effects of what they're doing.
Well, actually, the whole relinquishment movement, which says let's stop all this progress, the examples they give of the dangers are actually drawn from my book. So I've actually articulated, been active in talking about the downsides, which I agree are there.
All right, and we'll let Tan Lee have the final word after you two.
I think
and
you're
then
right
Richard.
in terms of the slowing down of progress, and I think that the people who are administering these institutions need to realise another metric in the system, which has to be the cost of inaction. Because right now, what we're so fearful of is the implications if the drug doesn't work, and the implications on the person that receives that treatment. However, we fail to acknowledge the cost of inaction. So if this drug doesn't get approved, how many thousands of people die as a result of the delay? And so I think that's another metric that we need to introduce into the system in order to catalyse some change in the institutions that are moving far too slowly. I mean, $1 billion to get a drug on the market means that the failure rate, the bar, is set too high, and it means that lots of drugs are failing when they should not be failing. And I think these are the kinds of things that we have to actually take a very active role in trying to change by having a really meaningful discussion around what the costs are, what are the alternative costs are.
Here.
Wow. Well, after a conversation that's gone, well, we've seen dictators toppled, we've seen the WikiLeaks phenomenon, we've seen the very real examples of competition that springs from within, from individuals. I wanted to thank our guests and all of you for participating tonight. I won't have the final word because I'd like my eminent colleague over here, Richard, to...
My final word is, look, I've just thoroughly enjoyed being involved in this conversation, and that's been added, the richness has come from the questions and your involvement, so thank you very much indeed for such a rich conversation.
And can I just say to all these wonderful people here, Narelle Hooper, Richard Hames, Tan Lee, Daniel Dennett and Ray Kurzweil, what a fascinating conversation. I think we have totally smashed Twitter tonight. There are so many tweets out there on the CI Global hashtag, and there's like, I don't know how many a minute. So you've really stimulated people and inspired people to share this knowledge with a much broader audience. And I hope that all of you go home and get super connected on the CI 2011 questions. And if any of you are interested and haven't registered yet, for tomorrow or Friday, there are still tickets available. So please join us. If you're only here today, please fill out your feedback forms. But now let's give a huge round of applause to these wonderful thinkers.